Welcome to Dare to be Legendary, a Daversa Partners podcast. Each episode, we feature conversations with some of the brightest minds in tech, including founders, executives, and investors who are entirely disrupting this generation's ecosystem. They are the ones who dare to be legendary.
Hi, everybody. I'm Maggie Libatique, Chief Financial Officer at Daversa Partners. And today I'm sitting down with David Schlanger, Executive Chairman at Progyny. They are the leading fertility benefits management company that touches over 30 industries and has over 4 million users. They are charting a new path for family building, including those in the LGBTQ plus community and single parents by choice. David joined Progyny as their CEO and currently serves as their Executive Chairman. David, so happy to have you on. It feels good to be back in the office and recording in person. Thanks for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me. And it does feel good to be with people again. So it's been a long time. Pleasure to be here.
Give us a bit of your background. You started off your early career in law and ended up in healthcare. How did that happen?
So I did start on Wall Street. I was a corporate finance and M&A lawyer during kind of the junk bond boom in the East, what they now call private equity, but the LBO kind of world. One of my big clients at the time was Drexel Burnham. That's kind of how far I go back. This was the late 80s. And when Drexel broke up, one of the bankers that I became close with went to go work for an entrepreneur who was running one of the country's leading PBMs at the time. And they called me up one day and basically recruited me out of the law. And I went there to go become an M&A professional and kind of never looked back at the law. But that's how I started in healthcare, which was kind of accidental, but also, left what was at the time a fairly promising legal career, I think.
I want to get right into it and would love to talk about how you came to join Progyny. This was the search our CEO was personally leading. And at the time, you were the CEO of WebMD. So why go to this small business? What did you see and what excited you about it?
Well, I think you have to back up a little bit and maybe just a tad of my history at WebMD is probably relevant. So I had a very good career at WebMD. The company did great things and we solved real problems in healthcare. Financially, it worked out well for me. The company was, hitting all its numbers, record revenue, record profitability. The share price had done really well. But after 25 years together, we no longer had a tenable relationship. So when I left, I was in a good position in that I didn't have to do anything right away. I was financially secure. What I told myself at the time was that was much more important who I worked with than what I did. I was going to work at a place where I liked the people, I respected the people. We all had a similar viewpoint about company culture and how you maximize performance. Pretty much right after, I left WebMD, I heard from you folks about this opportunity that happened to be in New York, which was helpful to me since I lived here, was in healthcare, again, helpful to me. And that was a small company in the fertility business, which I really knew nothing about because it's a small piece of healthcare, but had a couple great investors behind it, Kleiner Perkins and TPG. You quickly arranged for me to meet the two partners from those firms that were on the board. And we just hit it off personally. And I read up on fertility a little bit. I was intrigued. And I said to myself at the time, these are the kind of people I'd like to work with. I really have nothing to lose if I go there and it's not really a business. I'll tell them after a couple months, I'm doing them a huge favor to tell them not to put any more money in. But in the meantime, I'll have met some good people from some powerful firms. And that can always serve you well. And it was just an instinct about the people. I read up enough about fertility to know that there was some good cultural and societal tailwinds behind it. Whether this company had a good business proposition, I wasn't sure, but I was willing to go find out. And that's what happened.
I think it's widely known that the company you were recruited into was not quite the company you expected in the first 60 days on the job.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And it probably never is because from the outside, how do you really know what's going on? And it's what I told Beth and Fred are their names. Those are the two partners. I said, look, you have to get in there and see because I could read all the board presentations. I could interview some of the people, but until you get in there and see, everything had to be fixed. But there was one thing that was really intriguing. They had 5 customers, and 2 of which were 2 big tech companies, Facebook and Google, who are some of the smartest people you'll ever meet. And they were successful in getting them to buy their service. And I know, having been in the healthcare business before that and being in healthcare services, that they won't just buy anything. And it's hard to get them to buy. So I said to myself, if Google and Facebook see some value, there's got to be something there. So what we quickly learned at the first board meeting, what we told the board is, we think there's a business there. And in fact, I remember Fred Cohen, the partner at TPG, looking over at me in the board meeting. He goes, you think there's a business here, right? And I go, absolutely. And we laid out a plan that said we need this amount of money that will last this long to get us to profitability. And the good thing is the board said, well, take 50% more just so you have some cushion. And, from then on, we kind of hit the races. And I was lucky then when I came over that I wasn't the only one that got a divorce from WebMD and its chairman at the time. My CFO, Pete Nesky, did also. And I told Beth and Fred that you got to bring him too, because he really had the financial and operating skills to put all the systems in place to turn it into a good idea into a business. And I can handle kind of the marketing and positioning and, competitive factors, but you really need Pete to kind of put all those things together. And at the time, the company was losing $20 million a year, had 80 employees, 50 of which we had to get rid of. It was almost like starting from scratch, worse than starting from scratch in a few ways, but
here we are 5 years later, and we've said that we expect $750 million in revenue at the midpoint of our guidance, with over $100 million in adjusted EBITDA. And despite the downturn in the market, we're still more than double our IPO price.
So it's been quite a run.
It's amazing to see that Progyny continues to grow so much, even after going public back in 2019. What do you attribute to the rapid growth of Progyny, and how do you think it will continue to grow moving forward?
There's a lot of ways you could say it, but for me, successful businesses always solve problems. And, I think Progyny is a great example of that. So infertility is a gigantic health issue in this country. 1 in 8 couples suffer from infertility. And those are just the couples that have medical infertility. Then what I call social infertility. So same-sex couples, single moms by choice, but anyone that wants to have a child that can't do it naturally. And the number of people that affects is going up every year as the age at which people try to get pregnant goes up, and that biological clock's a real thing. So fertility is just a very big problem. And for employers who, 75 years ago made this pact with their employees, we, not the government, provide you your health care. And we provide your health care across, pretty much all the common and even uncommon diseases and ailments that we may suffer from. So if you're asthmatic, if you have cancer, whatever it may be, diabetes, heart disease, you tear up your knee playing tennis over the weekend, your employer's healthcare coverage covers it. But fertility was this strange thing. Even though it's a disease, it just wasn't covered. And when it was covered really poorly. And fertility is so unique, the physical and emotional demands of fertility journey are very unique, that the one-size-fits-all kind of approach that large managed care companies put to managing disease with very restrictive rules that are meant to control costs, not drive outcomes. It may work when your kid has a pink eye or when your kid has strep throat, but for many complex things, it doesn't work. And that approach can actually create bad outcomes and in the end, more expense. When it comes to fertility, if you can be better at it because of the cost of treatment and the negative downstream medical effects of treatment done poorly, you can create an enormous amount of value. So we started out with this notion of that we're going to focus on better outcomes and moving the needle on outcomes and being a real value-based healthcare company. And as you said, we've consistently had much better clinical outcomes than the national averages, and to the point where there's real financial value for employers. And it's not just financial value as a member, as a woman going through treatment. If you need to go through 1 cycle of IVF versus 2, that's a pretty big deal physically and emotionally. So we continue to grow because we continue to be better than everybody else. We're really offering employers just a better way to provide what's a really important coverage to their employees. And, even though it may only affect 1 or 2% of your employees, it's a very important segment of your employees. It's people that are kind of your mid-level managers that are driving the value of the business, and they're vocal. And you hear it every year. When something affects 1 out of 8 people, you're going to hear about it. And so they're hearing about it, and it's really become kind of one of those benefits that people change jobs for. And they're aware of it when they take a job because they know there's a good likelihood when it's their time, when they finally decide that they want to have a child, there's a decent chance that they may not be able to do it naturally. And if they have to actually go through IVF, it's crushingly expensive if you don't have coverage. So I think that's what drives the success of our business. Like most good businesses, solve a real problem and provide real value.
What is making employers focus more on fertility to include in their healthcare packages and benefits?
Well, I think there's 2 things. I certainly think in a very competitive labor market, even with what's going on around us, the best companies are competing for the best talent. And they used to compete pretty much on what your job is and how much they pay you, but they don't do that anymore. I mean, employees have gotten way smarter, and benefits are an important way that companies differentiate, amongst themselves. And their employees are asking for fertility coverage because of the expense, because the pretty high likelihood that it may impact them. So it's one of the things they're listening to. And when they look at their own, medical claims, which the best employers do, they realize how much they spend on maternity, how much they spend on fertility. But I think it's even beyond that. I think we're in an environment where women have been discriminated against in the workplace for decades. Companies have not been viewed as family friendly. And if you don't cover fertility, I think you're making a very negative cultural statement about who you are as a company, that you don't really value your female workforce, because fertility treatments are uniquely borne by women. Men don't get IVF, women do. If you don't cover fertility, I think you're making a negative cultural statement about where you stand about people having families. Whereas on the flip side, if you do cover fertility and cover it in a robust manner and encourage your employees to, when it's your time, have a baby, I think you're making a pretty strong cultural statement about who you are as a company and, how you view your role in the community and what healthcare is really all about. So, and companies get that. And, because our benefit is inclusive and you can be a same-sex couple, they want to make that statement to the LGBTQ plus community also, that they're an important population and they're going to provide them important benefits that can, allow them to build their families also, because those populations have family building dreams too. So I think those things drive it. It's a competitive workforce. It's the right thing to do because it is a healthcare condition, and it makes a strong statement about who you are as a company.
Since you do have that law background and you focus at Progyny on those self-insured employers, what impact does state regulation have on the services that you're offering to the self-insured employers?
Yeah, it's a good question. So state regulations usually around insurance regulations. So if you offer insurance in the state of New York, for instance, you have to offer fertility coverage. The complication for most people is that they don't get health insurance. They get health care provided by their employer. And when they use a big carrier like in New York, Empire Blue Cross or United or Empire Blue Cross is not insuring your coverage. They're just providing administrative services. So they provide the network, they provide claims processing, they handle all the financial elements for your employer. But your employer is really providing that. So, and your employer is not subject to those insurance regulations. So technically in New York, employers don't have to offer fertility coverage. Now, what happens though in reality is the mandates are very good, because a large employer is going to look at the insurance mandates and go, well, I'm certainly not going to have lesser coverage. JP Morgan, New York City's largest employer, they're not going to have lesser coverage than the restaurant in the lobby, which has 100 employees, but because they provide health insurance, has to provide fertility coverage. So it sets like a baseline in that state, and it's a really good policy that state is supportive of family building. So, the mandates are great. They don't directly affect our business, but I think they have a strong indirect impact on encouraging employers to do the right thing.
I learned the hard way about that nuance between self-insured employer coverage and what the state mandates. Because of the way Connecticut law works, probably similar.
Yeah,
to New York.
It's all you would appreciate. It's just all economics, right? That you have 1,000 employees, you have enough employees to spread the risk, right? So if you buy insurance for those 1,000 employees, you're just paying someone else a premium to take the same risk you could take on your own. So pretty much every employer that has, if they have a smart CFO that has 1,000 employees or more, is going to self-insure, because otherwise you're paying too much. It's cheaper to do it yourself.
Are there any other regulatory things that you worry about as far as?
Well, healthcare is a highly regulated industry. So, and it's funny, people always worry about what's happening with privacy and security regulations. If you just rely on the government to tell you how to keep data secure,
it will never be secure.
Yeah, it's never going to be secure. So we look at what's the state of the art in technology, right? And you have to have the state of the art technology, not just live up to what regulation is. Regulation is always well behind where you can be, because look, if you have a data breach, a company like Google doesn't really care about did you follow the regulation. They just want to know you had a data breach and how did it happen and what are you doing about it, right? You have to be able to look these companies in the face and say to them, we did everything we could, right? And it's obviously clearly the right thing to do. I mean, this is people's personal information, and fertility, like all of, but maybe even more so than a lot of healthcare, it's a very kind of sensitive area. I was watching something this morning where a woman was talking about having gone through multiple miscarriages and said she was ashamed by it, and it's very stigmatizing. So people don't want this information out. So so we, every business I've ever been involved in healthcare, despite there's always been regulation around it, we've always gone far above and beyond the regulations to make sure that things were safe and secure. And then there's all these arcane regulations about the third-party administrator or PBM that are really just licensing, and it's just a way for states to collect money. Frankly, they don't really impact your business at all.
Can we get your insights on what you're seeing in the market and the market correction that's currently happening right now?
I think, we've just come off a decade or more of easy money policy, and which I think really has fueled the stock market. Lots of innovation too. And, as a result, multiples got, very high. And, being an old M&A guy myself, I've said lots of times, I don't understand how companies get valued these days, because you used to figure out like what the terminal value of cash flows were and discount that back to the present, and you would have some sense of what a company's worth. But that's not really kind of how it's done. It was how it was done anymore. And I think valuations got really pretty lofty. And what you're seeing now is, I think, both a reflection of the easy money days are ending, that there are other asset classes available to investors that provide yield beyond stocks. And at the same time, I think investors are realizing that they have to be more thoughtful about companies that make money and provide a return on capital. So multiples are not just being based on revenues. People are thinking about profitability and margins. So I think that's what you're seeing in the marketplace. Now, what's happened is, unfortunately, like Progyny, for instance, we've been profitable for a long time. We've always viewed a business objective is to be a profitable business, not just to sell a lot. You can't make up for losses on your gross margin line with volume. So you're a CFO, you know that. So we've always focused on profitability. So I think what's happened now is that people are just selling everything. I think that will, I think once we find kind of the bottom of all this, that I think it's going to be an era of people going to start picking stocks again, and stocks based on some real fundamentals. Can you grow your margins? Are you profitable, et cetera? It's why you hear companies like Uber now saying to their employees, hey, we got to make money. We can't just have more rides. We have to make money. We have to have more rides and make money doing it. So I think it's all good. It's tough to watch your stock get cut in half when business is still really good. But I think ultimately it's a healthy thing if you get back to investing in companies that are really doing what's one of their fundamental purposes, which is to provide a return on capital, and to do that through profitability.
Well, David, this has been a great conversation. We really look forward to seeing how Progyny continues to grow and expand and change the lives of so many deserving people. As we wrap up here, let's look to the future. How do you see the fertility market and Progyny further developing, and what role does tech play in that?
Well, we're at the very early stages in the fertility market. Progyny has 300 customers. There's thousands of self-insured employers that could benefit from what we do. So I think you're going to continue to see fertility coverage being provided by more and more employers. I think you will continue to see them carve it out from their health plans, who are still remaining in the current situation of being bad at covering it. So I think you're going to see much more coverage. When it comes to technology, healthcare in general, technology develops very rapidly. And the same thing goes in fertility. The ability to genetically test embryos has, even in the 5 years that I've been involved in fertility, has dramatically improved. And you continue to see things like that going on in fertility. More things are happening to further differentiate the better providers, to create better outcomes. And I've always believed in healthcare that technology is an enabler as opposed to the end game, because healthcare is still delivered and will always need to be delivered with human touch. The doctor has to physically look in your ears. He's got to look down your throat. He's got to palpate your chest. Many of those things will never go away. Surgeries are done in person. IVF has 2 surgeries. They're always going to be done in person. But healthcare can be a terrific enabler and can make it better. So whether it's, instead of going to the doctor's office when you're going through fertility treatments to get your hormone levels checked, when you're going through all those hormone injections, you're going to be able to monitor that at home and not have so many visits to the doctor's office. And I think that's a great enabler. It makes the experience better, makes compliance better. So I look at technology and healthcare that way, because I fundamentally believe in the role of doctors in the healthcare system. Unlike other areas of our world where technology makes people go away, like for instance, you don't need customer service centers so much anymore because it's automated. I don't think that's the case in healthcare. Like we run a call center because people need to talk to somebody. It's complicated. Their situation's unique. They can't figure it out online. Now, can technology help them? Sure. They used to call in to pay their bills. They don't do that anymore. They pay their bills online. So technology helps them. By the way, they appreciate those things. They don't have to call up to schedule anymore. They schedule online. So all those things get helped by it. Our ability to analyze data and make our service better by using all the data we have. We rely heavily on that. Artificial intelligence on calls to see the quality of those calls and what members are talking about, and Are they happy? Are there any problems? So we use technology all the time in our business. But ultimately, when you go get IVF, when you speak to one of our fertility counselors, there's always going to be a very significant level of human intervention.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Dare to be Legendary, brought to you by Daversa Partners. Don't forget to subscribe, share with friends, and leave us a review. Thanks again, and stay tuned for our next episode.